All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to do something new today. She's going to be coming around getting your orders, so if she hasn't, just go ahead and move forward with that while I'm talking. But we've been selected, and I mentioned this at our last meeting, to do beta testing for Zoom. So that's online meetings. So we are recording this. We will edit it and put it on YouTube when we're done. So if you want to go back and review it or whatever, we'll post a link for it as well. We don't currently have a YouTube channel, but we will. So that just, yeah, I don't know exactly what we'll call it for sure, but something to do with Fort Wayne VMUG or FWVMUG. But eventually we may have it where people can join remotely if you can't make it in person. We're not quite sure on whether we're going to do that yet or just record the videos. This will also give us the ability to have remote speakers. So we already have one guy from somewhere northeast, I can't remember exactly where he is, in the Massachusetts area somewhere, that wants to present on security. He's a V expert in the security area and does presentations all over the world. So this will allow us to do that, and then we can also record it so you guys can go back again and review it. So, I need to switch slides. Shows, I don't know if anybody saw or already looked at this one, but okay. For anybody that hasn't seen yet, this is our new logo, and there's stickers. If you didn't get any on the way in, feel free to grab some. Eventually we'll have shirts and other stuff as well. So thanks again, Justin, for creating that. Looks good. Just a couple announcements. The VMUG virtual event is next Friday or next Thursday. Yeah, the 29th, whichever day that is. You can go in, you can attend that from that link. We'll post this link on our this slide deck on our website as well, or on our community page. Indie UserCon has been announced. July 10th is when that'll be. It's a great day. I don't know if anybody's been there before. I know several of you have, but we can always get together and drive down together so we don't all have to drive separate. We'll probably put out some emails or something to get a hold of us to maybe put a carpool together or whatever. So if you're interested, always a good day, all day long. It is, we have to leave a little bit early to get there. It's a couple hours down the road, but that's at the Indiana Convention Center, which by the way, I always thought it was the Indianapolis Convention Center, but everything online calls it the Indiana Convention Center. So either way, it's in Indianapolis. And then our next meeting will be April 18th. We don't have the location finalized yet, so I didn't put it up here. But we'll get that within the next couple of days. That'll be a whiteboarding session like what we've had the last 2 months. So if you have any topics you want to discuss that day, just let us know, or just bring them that day and we can bring them up and talk about them, whiteboard them. If you want to present, we can do that at any meeting, those included, or even the general meetings. Just a reminder about the community challenge that's going on. And for those of you that weren't here last month, VMUG is doing a VMware sponsored event with all the VMUGs. It's a challenge to see who can get the most points between January 1st and June something, June 30th, there it is. So the top 10 groups will get $3,000 towards a VMUG event like this, but obviously a little bigger than this with $3,000. We're currently in second place, so we're doing good. The way we get points for this is there's 3 ways. One, I guess I should go to the next slide. One is the meetings like this. We get 5 points. So we've got, with this meeting, they'll give us 15. For that, online local community posts. So if you go on and post a discussion on there, we get 5 points. You reply to a discussion that's on there, we get 5 more points. That's where we've got most of our points. So if you haven't been on our community page, go there. There's several discussions going on for different things. We started a I guess, repository, I guess, of sample scripts that, to share with each other. That's on there as well. We don't get points for that, but it is there. But the discussion posts, if you put something in there, just go and reply to the discussion on it, and we'll get 5 points. So, and then we also get a little bit of points, some bonus points for having Twitter and Facebook. It's not necessarily how much activity, it's just sending them our statistics from the posts that we do. But speaking of social media, we are on Facebook, Twitter. We also have a Slack account. So if you want to join Slack, we've only got 13 of you in there. So that's, if you want to join, we can send you an invite. Just let us know. We'll get that sent over to you. Facebook, it's, I don't remember which one it is, but anyways, we are on Facebook. There's only, a handful, 8 maybe in this Facebook page. Not a whole lot of activity in there. We did it just to kind of spread out a little bit, but then we're also on Twitter. We post a little bit, and then we're on LinkedIn as well. But most of the stuff goes through Twitter or through our group page or Slack. Slack's, I don't know does everybody use Slack? Everybody know what it is? Anybody not know what it is? So Slack, have you ever heard of Microsoft Teams? Is that what it's called? Or IRC, or it's an instant messaging type thing, but you can group stuff. You can create, so we have a channel, we have a Slack workspace, that's what it's called. And then underneath that, we have different channels, which are basically threads. So we have one for just general, whatever you want to talk about. We have one specific to meetings, so we put meeting information in there. Anything we put out on Twitter gets put into the meeting, or not anything, but anything about meetings. We put a hashtag of Fort Wayne something, and it shows up into the Slack, in the meeting channel. There's one for just random, basically social type things if you just want to talk about it. Justin occasionally will put stuff out there. Hey, I'm going out for a beer. Anybody want to come? Type thing. So get in Slack. Help stay connected. My wife says I can actually leave the house. Yeah. He has a baby, so yeah, that changes everything, right? And then of course our overall community growth. I think we're up to 315 members, technical members. We only have about 40 active members. So there's a lot of people have been a member for a long time and don't use it. And there's also people from all over the world that are in it that, whatever reason, they joined the Fort Wayne group. So we also announced this last time, our local VMUG Advantage giveaways. We give away two each year. We may give away a third one. We're not quite sure if we're going to be able to do that yet this year. We'll be giving one away in June and one away in December at those meetings. The way you get entries into that, one for attending each meeting that you get, or one for each meeting. And then we get an entry for each post or reply you put to a post on the discussion board or discussion page on vmug.com. Those are the main ways. Those are the only ways. And then we'll carry over all of the entries at June. We'll carry over to December as well. So it doesn't start as a clean slate in July. I will tell you the person with the most has 8 entries already. So he's made several posts on our discussion page and replies. So, and I don't know everybody's name, so I would maybe point him out. But so anyways, so get some page. Does everybody know what VMUG Advantage is? I know we talked about it last month, so I know several do, and we've brought it up in other meetings. Anybody not know? Okay. That's what the next slide's for. All right, so VMUG Advantage, it's normally $200, which we can always figure out a way to get 10% off at least. So you can usually get it for $180. So it's basically a $180 value that we're going to give away. It gives you all this stuff. If you go to VMworld, it's $100 off registration, and that's stackable. So if you have any other discounts, you still get this discount. So right there, if you're going to VMworld, you want to get this because it's only $80 for you at that point, versus just going to VMworld without it. You get discounts on labs and exams and different workshops and stuff. But one of the biggest things is this one right here, the eval experience. Damn, I need to resize my slide, but that's a big one. So if you have a home lab or you want to have a home lab, here's all the software you get with VMUG Advantage. You get a 365-day subscription to pretty much everything VMware. There's a couple things that aren't on here, but for the most part, if you want to run VMware on your local machine to run VMs, VMware Workstation or Fusion, depending on whether you have Windows or Mac or Linux. So yeah, there's the plug for VMware Advantage. If you do get it, so say you go out and buy it today and then you win the drawing, what happens is it extends your subscription that you already have for another year. So if you still have 200 days left, well, now you got 565 left on. So don't delay just to see if you get it, but if you want to get it, go ahead and get it, and it'll just be icing on the cake when you get the other. So they are trying to get them to do some VMware Cloud on that, but we don't know if we'll actually get that. But yeah. All right, so that's all I've got on the slides. Tonight's sponsor, I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, is Pivot3. Make sure to talk to them. We can't have these events without our sponsors because this stuff isn't all free. So I meant to have some slides on it, but yeah, I already mentioned them. I had a long day, so I didn't get all that done. All that done. Yeah, I know you guys probably all know how that goes. So we're going to have Pivot3 present, do a presentation, and then after that we have VMware. Brian is here somewhere. Brian Fair is going to present some on Horizon and some other things on some home lab type stuff. So, all right, so I will turn it over to them. So we'll just have a couple minute transition period while we do that.
So while Robert's setting up, my name is Gary Sharp. I'm the regional sales director for Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. How many of you have maybe heard of Pivot3? All right, that's not uncommon. So, of course you have. So Robert's going to talk a little bit today. Robert is Labrador. He's my voice carries. Oh, all right. So Robert Labrador is in charge of our solution architects for Eastern U.S. and Canada. But Pivot3 got its roots in the ingestion, the compute, and storage of video surveillance. And then through our acquisition of NextGen, we are in the data center with hyperconverged infrastructure. So Robert's going to talk a little bit today about HCI, especially as it pertains to maybe workloads, virtual desktops, Splunk. But this is it's a dialogue. It's not a monologue. So if you have questions, by all means, please ask them. And of course, we'll be here throughout the evening, so feel free to talk to us. But yeah, I appreciate your guys taking time out of your evening to spend with us and VMUG, and Robert will present. So thank you.
Bear with us, it's new.
Zoom.
So I missed some of the questions, unfortunately. A lot of you don't know who Pivot3 is, correct? All right. Before I go into the presentation, I do have a question out there. I'm not so much related to this presentation, but to Pivot3 themselves. How many of you have surveillance cameras in your business? Yourself? Over 100, would you say? Okay. Can you hold up your hands really quick one more time just so we can take a look? Gary, take a look, because we probably want to have also a side conversation with you, because Pivot3 is known for surveillance storage also, and it's a part of some resiliency and scalability factors that we take into play that make surveillance storage very, very compelling to businesses. And we're known really well out in that space for healthcare, transit, and other businesses out there that really use a lot of surveillance storage. Okay, so we'll probably come back and come around and have a kind of a side conversation too with you. Okay. So today's topic is how NVMe flash, QoS, and policy management based are revolutionizing software-defined data centers. Okay, I was thinking about the word revolutionizing, and I said, well, we actually enable companies to become software-defined data center, and I'll go more into that. So is there anyone here in this crowd that it's 100% virtualized? Okay, great. Anyone who's not virtualized at all? Or so everyone here at some form is probably right in the middle of the road. Okay, great. So there's some driving factors out there that are driving software-defined approaches. And one of them is cloud computing. So cloud computing is basically, line of business, self-service, policy-driven automation, anything as a service, platform as a service, IaaS as a service. We're looking at VDI that's having a direct impact on software-defined. We're looking, VDI, end user computing, big data that's out there now. We're actually seeing a lot of applications that are companies taking advantage of big data. How are we going to be able to make some business decisions based on all this flow of information that's coming into the company now? And what are we going to do with it? How can we make some smart decisions with our company, for our company? And then DevOps. There's a lot of companies who are still developing software specifically for their company in their specific industry. We are working with an insurance company that deals with being able to take claims right after a disaster, like the Florida disaster recently. A bunch of the agents went out there and they took their laptops out, took their iPads out, and started doing claim orders live. And you have to be able to handle that. And they used their own proprietary software rather than trying to buy something off the shelf. But in short, what does this really mean? What it really means is that business and IT has a direct impact to business. Do we agree with that? So something goes down can also cause issues to your business. So we need, as IT professionals, our solutions need to be agile. They need to be flexible. They need to be able to be liquid at times, being able to deal with the ebb and flow of the business. We also need to be efficient in the manner in which we deliver our data, our solutions to the business. And then also, for everyone in the room, we need to be simple, right? Sometimes you guys wear multiple hats. Sometimes you're not only just system admins, but you're also network admins and you're storage admins. So a lot of the solutions that you choose need to be simple. And these are key drivers in pushing businesses to that software-defined data center. Reason why I asked you those questions, who's 100% virtualized, who's just starting out? Majority sounds like you're right in the middle of that. The journey towards software-defined storage is different for everybody. Some people are still standardizing on their hardware and haven't really gotten to virtualization yet. You may be a small IT shop, but in any case, you're going to be at some time maybe moving towards virtualization and be able then take that ability to consolidate your servers. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I've been in this industry for about 23 years. My background is VMware. I actually started with VMware back in 2006, 2007. So I'm a believer at heart. I love VMware still today. But the thing was, it was that shared infrastructure, the collaboration of VMs together, mixed workloads, being able to reduce my footprint in the data center, going down from 5 racks down to 2 or 3. And you saw this phenomenal CapEx and OpEx savings, but then also it opened up some doors to some other things, some other possible issues too, in terms of mixed workloads and troubleshooting and not being able to determine where a performance issue came from due to the IO blender. And I'll talk more about that later. But then we're now at that cusp. We're at that automation piece. The business is growing, or you're taking in more companies. We're seeing that happen, and you also need to be agile. So automation is starting to come into a big play, and we have to address that so you can address the needs of that business. And there's policy-based management. There's auto optimization. We see a lot of the products that VMware has that you can utilize to optimize. But then also there's some of the native things that I'm going to go through within Pivot3 and hyperconverge that we can offer that help with that automation and optimization of data. Is there anyone in this room currently today dabbling or looking at hyperconverge or has an interest in hyperconverge? Okay, great. So for those who haven't looked at it or haven't heard of it at all, in short, it's taking that traditional IT infrastructure and relationship of server, network, and storage and aggregating it together, okay? Putting it together so now compute and storage are together. And if you heard me mention earlier, I said that we enable, HCI enables software-defined storage because we're part of that next iteration. Not only are we doing, server virtualization, but now we're doing storage virtualization, right? And then next to that is network virtualization. So now we're going to be able to have those solutions in a box. But when you utilize HCI, you're actually you're increasing some agility and being able to look at your environment, actually determine that, hey, it's flexible enough now that I could potentially, if I go down the route of software-defined data centers, that this data center can be not only in this location, but it also could be in this location, and I have got consistency and standardization between the two locations. So it provides you some great agility. And this is just a little marketing slide. So again, I'm with Pivot3. Some of you did not know who we were, but we are the #1 leader in performance, scale, and efficiency for modern data center. And we are the most efficient HCI player out there today, in part because we utilize NVMe flash. We take advantage of this quality of service engine, and I'm going to get more into that soon. So that way, you as a company, you as a IT owner can pick and choose which applications are most important to your business and make sure that that performance of that application is going to get the right service level of agreement when it comes to all the mixed workloads that are out there, all the mixed applications. We are the #1 largest HCI deployed out there today, believe it or not. We are the #1 in terms of storage efficiency. We do something a little bit different than your traditional RAID. So we use a scalar erasure coding, and we've been doing this since 2005, believe it or not. We've been doing this through 2005, and because scalar erasure coding is different than RAID, it also buys us some things when it comes to scalability. We're also being able to scale differently than and giving greater usability of storage using scalar erasure coding. And then we are 2 to 3 times greater in performance. I'm going to build this out real quick. So the 3 things that we think are our pillars, or what differentiate ourselves, is that we have distributed scale out. I mentioned scalar erasure coding, and then this policy QoS and NVMe flash tier. From a distributed scale out, we actually aggregate all the server nodes together and create a single resource pool for storage. Okay, we create a large drive pool and uniform distribute that data across all the nodes. For some of you who have already spoken to HCI manufacturers, it sounds like we do the same, right? Well, because we use scalar erasure coding, we don't rely on replication to save data, right? We actually, what scalar erasure coding does is take small chunks of that data and spreads it evenly across all the nodes. And we add parity to it, and then algorithms to check on the data blocks to ensure that that is the correct data. And we do it both horizontally and vertically. It's a very interesting algorithm, and it does it in a low level that checks data consistency. But if you notice here from the screen, and it's a little washed out though, traditional RAID, once be RAID 6, I'll use that example, you stay at that 66% usable throughout. So if I'm growing my nodes and I'm scaling more and more into my environment because I need capacity, well, that 66% stays at the same. But if with scalar erasure coding, I add more nodes, my usability goes up. So we can go from 66 to 72 to 74 to 78 to all the way up to potentially, and I use the word potentially, 94% usable when you aggregate all your nodes together. Fundamentally different than any other HCI manufacturer out there. And I will say the validity of HCI scalar erasure coding is that you take a look at the other HCI manufacturers, they're starting to implement it or say, hey, we do the same thing too. But we are on our 7th revision of our software, and we've known about this for quite a while. Okay. Policy-based QoS and NVMe flash tier. We all here are familiar with NVMe, right? It's been SSDs, non-volatile memory express. I dare not say protocol, but it's the new manner in which we will are more efficient with SSDs. The legacy way we do it, or the legacy way it's done, or other manufacturers are still doing it today, they're putting those SSDs behind the SATA and SAS controllers. Those SATA and SAS controllers were designed for spindle. So you are not as efficient, you're not getting as much throughput. With NVMe, you're getting almost 4 to 5 times greater performance with your SSDs when you use NVMe. So Pivot3 saw that and decided, hey, let's move forward in our architecture and utilize this NVMe tier. And so we're very, very efficient in the writing and reading of our data. But the other thing to add additional flavor to this is that we have a patented quality of service within our storage. So we recognize that not all data is the same. Not all applications mean the same thing to your business. So we allow you as a business owner decide which applications are most important, which applications are making money and which ones not, and let you provide SLAs to help with that, to help when there's contention. I mean, how many times has someone downloaded or uploaded data and has caused disruption to your applications, or someone in DevOps kicked off a batch process and just caused disruption in your environment? With QoS, we ensure that the IOPS, throughput, and latency are guaranteed to those applications. And we do it in 3 simple ways: mission critical, business critical, and non-critical. And I've got some examples here how we could lay out volumes and how you can define those applications.
Think about that. That's not an IOP limiter, right? A lot of people do QoS from an IOP limiter standpoint. This is saying that if there is contention, then this application or these sets of applications receive the resources they need. It's very different than what's currently being done. So
yeah, that's a very, very good point, right? So we can allow a file and print volume run freely until we see that it's disrupting the IOPS in an order database, right? Which has a direct impact to users or potentially adding orders to your. I already mentioned this, and I keyed into it a little bit early, was about the better performance with less hardware. You know, Pivot3 and you'll see the name Acuity. Acuity is the name of our product. Okay, that's the name of our product that utilizes NVMe, Flash, and QoS. So oftentimes I'll say Acuity, that's what I mean. But NVMe is optimized in the architecture. We do take the time to make sure that the data path is extremely efficient as we're ingesting data, we're coalescing it, we're destaging it down to either spindle or SSDs, depending on your performance needs. But then also, we know that data gets hot again, and we can put that back up into the read cache section of the NVMe flash. Or, without getting too deep into it, if we see it's a large sequential read, we'll put it back up in RAM. So you're even getting quicker response times rather than from NVMe flash. The net result in this is that the results that we found is that we are 2 times to 3 times more VMs per node than other HCI manufacturers. We've seen that from our tests that we are 6 times better performance than conventional hyperconverged infrastructure vendors. And then we are 450% faster than SATA SSDs out there. And I talked to you a little bit why that happens because of the SATA and SAS controllers that are out there. Our QoS is based off 3 metrics that we look at: IOPS, throughput, and latency. Okay. A mission critical volume is going to get the highest performance possible. We're going to be always, as in flight, we're going to be interrogating the SLA of that block, and we're going to determine if we're going to be violating it or not. Well, the reason why I said that, because I want to illustrate here, in an environment, we may have an order database, or for VDI, a power user, and then a development database, all mixed together in an HCI environment. Well, like I said, all data is not equal, and there will be times where maybe that engineer will kick off a batch process, and it'll start chewing up the IOPS of that appliance, that storage appliance, and which can have a direct effect to your production database. So we see that happens quite frequently without QoS. But with Pivot3 and our QoS, again, you immediately assign a value to that volume when you create it. You can say it's mission critical, business critical, or non-critical. And in that same instance where dev takes off again and starts creating that batch process, chewing up IOPS, it will stop, during flight, it'll see that, hey, potentially I am going to be violating the SLAs or the policies of the mission critical volume, and I need to make sure that that's not going to stop any of the productivity of that volume. So it moves those blocks in the execution queue ahead of those that are non-critical. Hopefully I said that correctly. Yes.
You did.
Okay. What about your current investment? Well, Pivot3 knows that we can't just be a rip and replace to your environment. We actually can be a value add to it. So your current investment in storage, we can sit next to it. We would be presenting as an iSCSI target either to your remote servers or be part of the cluster within Virtual Center. And as time goes on, we allow for that coexistent to be easily migrated into our hyperconvergence infrastructure. There are a lot of other HCI manufacturers out there that only want you to play in their sandbox or only want you to play within their cluster, right? So they're very, Heisman arms against any type of other application or appliances in their environment. And we do have integration. I want to say that we are integrated in vCenter. I know for some of you it's like, oh, everybody is, but hey, if I don't say it, then it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? So we are integrated with vCenter. All right, so you can provision data stores through vCenter. You can aggregate as you add additional nodes to the environment. You can control that all through vCenter. So you don't have to do 5 or 6 additional steps in another user interface, then go back into vCenter, discover it, and it's all done in one simple click of a button. Also, I mentioned earlier that we have different types of environments. We have environments that use SSDs, right? And then we have environments that you can use spindle for destaging purposes. Those are what we consider VPGs. They're different types of VPGs. We can administer unlimited amount of virtual protection groups all through vCenter. So I can have an all-flash virtual protection group, or I can have a hybrid all protection group, all servicing up to your environment. Extended infrastructure with standards-based REST APIs. Again, it's another way of illustrating how we integrate and provide automation to your environment. If you're using RESTful APIs, you're using third-party software, those things, extended vRealize and vCloud Director capabilities. All those things, we give those capabilities to help you automate in your environment. Should I stop here and ask guys if there are any questions? I kind of threw out a lot here. Maybe a different way of thinking about things. Are we okay so far? All right. Yes.
So, just out of curiosity, who are some of the more nationally known data center providers and hosting providers that you guys are working with? Are you working with all the major ones here in the U.S. or are there select ones? For example, we have a large amount of our production equipment hosted within the rack space environment. Are they one of the companies that you guys work with, or are there just specific ones?
There are a multitude of ones. Yeah. Yeah.
I just was curious.
Yeah.
You repeat it.
Yeah, I'll repeat it. So wanted to know, Pivot3 worked with specific hosting or cloud manufacturers, or there are the large ones right now, or that everyone's accustomed to hearing about, which AWS or Azure. We are building connectors to those as it stands today, which is going to be in our future release of our product. There are cloud providers today. Iron Mountain is a good example. Iron Mountain actually allows surveillance customers to stream their data, their surveillance data to Iron Mountain. So a different type of use case, but that's a big name. That's someone who we work with. And then I have someone up in Canada, they're named Stage 2 Data, where this is a little unique, but everything flows back to Pivot3, is that they're DR as a service. They have all the top law firms in Canada using Zerto to replicate right back to Pivot3.
That answer your question?
Okay. So the next section is simple operations with a policy-based foundation. So these are just some of the examples that I just want to lay out to you for you how we can be utilized in the data center. In a mixed workload environment, we can create 3 different types of volumes, and we put them in, and you create you put your SLAs based on that: mission critical, business critical, and non-critical. For mission critical, you want to put anything that's critical to functioning of the business, anything that is IOPS sensitive, right? Anything that's going to have impact to your applications. Some examples here are OLTPs, ERP, or even a CRM application. You can also create a volume for what we deem as business critical. And that would be still an important function to your organization, but maybe not as critical in terms of the performance necessary. But at times it may spike, and at times there may be low periods, right? And then non-critical, you could put your file and print, any non-performing type of applications down, or SQL log files, things of that nature down on the non-critical. And what happens when something is in non-critical, it just means that it's not going to be put back up into read cache, because it's never going to be deemed as hot data again. Now, it's not static when you do this. When you label a volume mission critical or non-critical, we give you the ability to have that flexibility to change it on the fly. So I can change a non-critical volume to business critical, non-critical. Let's just say I have an accounting application, and at the end of the quarter or the month, I've got to run this batch file. Well, I want to make sure it's getting the best performance possible, so I'm going to change it to mission critical. So all that data is going to be copied up into read cache temporarily. Okay, and then at the end of the month, I could put it back down to non-critical, and it won't affect any of the other applications. And this can be scheduled. And we threw DRS in here because, in essence, the VMs can land on any, and these are servers actually. You can't see them very well. These are servers, and DRS plays a key role here because you can move those VMs across all the other nodes, and it's not going to affect where they're going to get the access, and where it's not going to change it's not going to change if it's a mission critical, business critical, or non-critical. We can extend this a little bit further. Because our hypervisor is based on VMware, we could take advantage of some of the cloud connectivity and some of the automation. And that's, we can use vRealize, vCloud Director, or some other OpenStack to connect to both private clouds or public clouds. And we can apply the same rule to VDI. So VDI, if you're familiar, if you use that, that it's broken up into 3 types of users: power users, knowledge workers, and task users. Well, most likely those power users are going to need IOPS, right? And it says here, gives you some of the descriptions of what a power user is. It's got a larger CPU and RAM. It's IO intensive. Well, that means we can put that in. We should probably put that in a power user to ensure that we're getting that user is going to get the performance they need when they run their applications. Then knowledge workers, which are more typical of what I do, or some of you are administrators today, where you're just doing Excel spreadsheets, opening up Word. You'll probably just want to be that knowledge user, and you can be in that mid business critical QoS. I'm just going to build this out again. So if you kind of see the methodology of what we do and how we do it, is that we take, like I said, anything that's critical in terms of performance and IOPS, you want to put them in mission critical. Anything that is that is going to is spiky in need, or is not necessarily needs high performance all the time, but is there when it's needed. You probably want to put that in the business critical, and then again, nothing that's not critical, no impact to performance. You want to put that in a non-critical bucket. We just ran a reference architecture with Splunk. Are any of you running Splunk here? Oh, wow. You've raised your hand. I have just recently started learning more and more about Splunk, and that I think it's an extremely powerful tool. If any of you get a chance to read up on what it does and pulling machine data and what it can actually do, I'm very, very excited. Splunk, we just did a reference architecture, and in short, I hate to spill the candy here, but Splunk came to us and said, okay, well, based off of this type of hardware, these number of VMs, you should expect X amount of performance. And so we took that, we built an environment, and we used hybrid. We didn't do all flash, right? We didn't. We built the Splunk environment. We created indexers and used search nodes, and basically we blew the doors off Splunk in performance and expectations. And I've got some numbers here to share. But what's interesting with Splunk and there's synergy between us, because they have a tendency to move data when data gets cold. So when data is first ingested, it's in a hot bucket or a warm bucket. Later on, when that data gets stale, they move it to a cold bucket, and then they move it to a thawed bucket, right? At that point, thawed bucket never gets read again, but the cold bucket potentially can be utilized. Well, if it gets warmed, that means and most likely it's on spindle or slower drives. When you apply QoS for us, we can actually help the performance of cold buckets by copying it back up into read cache at need be, right? So we've helped the performance of Splunk, because when data moves down and is down into the lower performing medium, we can actually move it back up and make it much quicker up into the faster NVMe flash. Here's just some of the testing that we've done against other hyper-converged infrastructures out there. I'm not going to say who it is, but just we've taken, based off the what we found published by them, we've tried to match apples for apples, what they're doing and what we're doing. And our tests has shown that in terms of databases, we're about 2 times faster in IOPS, 2.6 times faster in IOPS. In terms of sub-millisecond IOs delivered at higher queue depths, meaning as you're adding more going from 12 to 16 to 32 to 64, we're about 9 times faster based on a queue depth when they start reaching that cliff and start slowing down. So, and then also in terms of faster application response times, we've seen that based off the NVMe and the QoS, we were getting 62% lower latency. When we did VDI, and by the way, this is an ESG. This is in an ESG report. It's a third-party reporting testing manufacturer. They went out and tested us against other HCI manufacturers in VDI, and it showed that we were actually, as a knowledge worker, we are almost double the density when it came to the VMs.
Nobody virtualizes desktops to save money. Let's face it, we did that with servers. We don't do it with desktops. But when you're doing virtualization of desktops, that cost per desktop becomes a factor in which not only how far we deploy it, but how much buy-in we get in from those that control budgets. When you're talking about the density that Pivot3 delivers, and we're more than, cutting that cost per desktop in half because of how many we can get per node, it's a very relevant discussion. So again, a lot of this information are on those flash drives over where you checked in, and my business card is there. But if you're doing VDI or you're considering VDI, you have to look at Pivot3 and how we're doing this to help keep your cost per desktop down.
Okay. And so we also took a look, did some testing on SQL, and we have found that our transaction per minute in comparison to others were much higher, much faster, and we did it in a smaller subset of nodes. So for us, our starting point is 3 nodes, where we were able to accomplish it in 3 nodes. It took our competitor at least 4 to 5 to come even close to the type of performance that we saw. So from VDI to SQL to mixed workloads, it's proven that we can meet the needs of an organization, especially around any of their tier 1 applications. And this was the response times that we've gotten from when we did our Splunk reference architecture, right? So it was 13 terabytes day indexing. We were able to have an uptick of 405%. Pretty impressive, especially if it's Splunk telling us that, hey, you should, based off these number of CPUs, based off this RAM, based off this data set type, this is your performance, and we blew those numbers out. Okay. Talked about the cost. I don't want to drive too much into this, but from a VDI perspective, we were lower in cost, versus a competitor. In terms of transactions per minute, we were cheaper in price.
Yeah, and I think there's a Groupon out there as well. So look for that.
Yeah.
And, sign up for it and let me know that you got it.
So this is the last slide, right? And, optimizing the modern data center with Pivot3, advanced QoS and NVMe flash, right? It really is the game changer. It's really, because what we've seen out there is when HCI came out, or they sacrificed performance and manageability for simplicity, to make it just to get themselves into your operations. And when it did, it failed miserably because they couldn't keep up what was important to IT, and that was your business. Modular distributed scale out. Because of scalar erasure coding, we can provide simple, predictable scalability. We know that we're going to go from 66% usable up to 94% usable as you grow. IOPS grow with you, throughput grows with you, and latency goes down. Open interoperable policy and based architectures and APIs. We have a eco-friendly environment when it comes to third-party manufacturers and backups, replication, open APIs. So as you look to software-defined data centers, you can see that we truly are an enabler of that, because the manner in which we work together and maintain that performance with NVMe and QoS. I'm done. Thank you again for having us. I love doing these VMUGs. I love meeting people and hearing more about your business. We're going to be here. Again, those who raised their hands around surveillance, so we're going to give you a little more, come by and talk to you too. All right. Thank you.
Nice job, Robert.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay. We're going to take just a couple minute break to switch presenters. Brian's going to come up and speak on Horizon and some home lab stuff. So if you need to take a restroom break or whatever, go ahead and feel free to do that now, and we'll be back in a couple minutes. All right, guys, we're on. Go ahead and get ready, or get started. Not ready. We're already ready. So, all right, I'll turn it over to Brian.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it. Appreciate you guys all coming out tonight. Want to thank the sponsors specifically for the meal and putting this on, getting you guys all together. So thanks to them. Without sponsors, these events couldn't happen. We also want to thank the leaders. That's a volunteer job, right? So they're doing this out of the goodness of their heart, trying to get everything put together, these meetings put together. I'm sure they're always looking for speakers. So, if you guys ever want to speak at one of these meetings, I'm sure they would be more than happy to have you. It's a user group, right? So it's really more powerful when users are presenting. So to that end, I kind of deviated a little bit from the corporate issued slides that go across, what's new in Horizon 7.4. We talked about this a little bit. All of what's new in Horizon 7.4 is in the release notes. If you're really interested, a lot of bullets there, you can read through it. There's a lot of good things in 7.4. I guess we'll cover a few of those. 7.4 has the session collaboration. It's kind of the main new thing in Horizon 7.4. So I'd also check out the 7.3 release notes if you aren't on 7.3 already. It's a great release. How many Horizon customers do we have in the room? And 1, 2, awesome, great. So I'm glad I'm not covering what's new because it doesn't seem like that really matters. So the little deviation I went on was I've got a home lab, work for VMware, I'm a technical account manager. Part of that job is to try and help customers, adopt software that they purchase, help them navigate, the interop matrix, what works with what version do you need to be on, what Spectre meltdown patches work with my CPU, all of that kind of good stuff. So try and work with them to understand, what it is they're trying to do and how they get there. So I've got this home lab where I test out stuff from time to time, just to, see what the customers are doing and kind of the obstacles they might run into and try and hit those in advance so that we can talk through those more specifically. So recently I deployed Horizon in my lab. As mainly a remote access solution. There we go. So kind of the things I want to cover are really around the problem statement, what we're trying to solve with the lab. Go through some of the new features and whatnot, and then get some screenshots in here from a demo of NSX integration with Horizon. So doing identity firewall. So that should be pretty fun. Kind of shows how some of these pieces might stack together. We'll have time at the end, I'm sure, for a demo. But if you guys have any questions along the way, feel free to just stop me and we'll talk through them then. I try to get some screenshots of most of the things because as demos go, sometimes they'll fail. So we'll just point at screenshots, worst case. So the first thing, my problem statement here, it's really small on myself. So my main goal was trying to, figure out VMware products in a non-production environment before I'm in front of a customer, just so that I know what's going on a little bit. And I had a couple of main design goals when I was deploying Horizon into this lab. First thing I wanted to do was just have a really simple way to get some desktops that were joined to my lab Active Directory without having to join my physical desktop to my lab Active Directory. And any home labbers in the room, people with home labs? And okay, so yeah. So as you know, if you have a home lab and you try and build DNS, you got all this weird name resolution stuff unless you start pointing your actual desktop at your lab DNS, and you get this whole weird, your domain controller goes down and now you can't get the internet, and if you have wives or kids at home or something where they rely on the internet and they can't get to DNS, now you've got this Sev1 production down kind of thing going on. So want to get out of the business of that, and only have these lab machines pointed at Active Directory, so not impacting anybody else as I break things. And then one of the things I want to do is be able to access the lab from anywhere, right? Sometimes you're wanting to show something to a customer and you don't want to just kind of rely on screenshots. You want to kind of go off script and just poke at things. So wanted to use Horizon for that. And then I wanted to integrate with some other things, right? Horizon supports two-factor authentication. How many people have RSA or phone factor or some of that? Yeah, everybody's got that. So I wanted that too in my lab just to kind of run with it. So that was a kind of a neat thing to set up. I've got a few slides on that and a blog post I can send you to if you guys are interested in setting up your own MFA in your home lab. And then integration with NSX. NSX was one of the kind of things I built the lab to poke around with. For those not familiar, NSX is VMware's network virtualization product. So it does a handful of things. You can load balance with it. You can create dynamic networks to do stretch layer 2 from one site to another, that sort of thing. But there's also a distributed firewall component, and that's probably the most popular use case for NSX. Being able to block access for everything in this cluster to everything in this cluster, so that dev can't talk to production, or block these IPs from talking to that IP, right? You could do all of that IP-based stuff with a physical firewall, but NSX lets you have the equivalent of a centrally managed firewall at every VM network adapter. So kind of clever. But then, even on top of that, instead of just having to do IP rules from, this VM's IP to this VM's IP on this port, you can kind of up that a little bit and use things like cluster name, VM name. The example we'll show in the demo here is actually using an Active Directory group. So my user account is in a specific group, and therefore I can't get to certain resources. So we'll go through a demo of that. But any questions, any thoughts, anything, other topics you want to cover while we go through here? I kind of wedge them in. We can do this as interactive as you want. No? All right, we'll go through some of what we got screenshotted here. So, man, that is tiny. So let's see if we can, there's a zoom thing in here, I'm pretty sure. At least when I was. Any, oh, here we go. Pointer options. This is more of a PowerPoint thing. I wasn't in two screen mode when I was testing this out, so shame on me. Yeah, can we? Is that a thing? It just goes back.
Can you gesture that or no?
I don't think so.
No.
I think we went back a slide. Okay, anyway, we'll just point at this. When we get in the demo, we'll be able to see this a little bit better. So this is a screen where we made an instant clone desktop pool. So kind of the key takeaway from this is that we have a desktop that gets delivered just in time, right? So it gets spun up based off of this instant clone parent. You can see a little bit of the virtual infrastructure here. We've got a data center with a cluster, a couple of hosts. In the lab, these are just virtual machines, right? They're VMs running ESX, so nested ESX hosts. We've got a couple ESX agents. These are required for the identity firewall. They're called guest introspection appliances that they were, you're fine. They were deployed by NSX, and they're part of that identity firewall thing. We've got the actual desktops that we'll be connecting to down here at the bottom. But here in the middle, we have four. There's a template, there's a replica, and then there are two parent VMs. So Instant Clone uses these parent VMs. There's one per host. And so when I've got a pool ready and waiting for 3 people, but I could actually make that pool bigger, make it smaller, whatever. But Instant Clones take just a couple of seconds to spin up a VM to a running state. It's actually kind of the newer version of linked clones. If anybody's familiar with linked clones from previous versions, instant clones were introduced in Horizon 7 to be just a quicker way. There's no need for composer or composer databases, any of that overhead. It's just kind of built in. And then these VMs, these parent VMs, are actually running. And there's a new thing in vSphere 6.0. I think it was like update 2 or somewhere around there, called VM fork. Anybody heard of VM fork? It's a way to actually clone a VM that's running and actually clone the memory contents of it as well. So like it comes up already running. And so spinning up more and more of these really has little overhead because it's starting from this state that it's already got the exact copy of. So pretty slick. It's one of the things I kind of wanted to test out. So like I said, I've got a pool of just 3 because I'm doing nested ESX hosts. Resources get a little crazy, so sometimes it may not perform super well. So if the demo's not performing super well, don't blame VMware products. It's the guy who architected it, right? All right. Another thing we can do are remote desktop pools. So I got a couple screenshots over here on the right of kind of that workflow of setting up a pool and publishing an application. Anybody familiar with Citrix, pretty much the same idea, right? You have a pool of servers, you put apps on them, and then you can share out those individual apps to users. I've got one of these in the lab. We'll show kind of how that looks in the client here in a little bit when we do the demo piece. As of NSX 6.4, which was recently released, we support identity firewall with RDSH hosts. Now, these don't have to be Horizon View RDSH. This can be just regular Windows RDSH. This can be Citrix XenApp. But being able to do this identity firewall demo that we're doing actually on a terminal server, which is pretty slick. I don't have that set up in my lab because I just went to 6.4 like a few weeks ago and don't have the guest introspection appliances deployed to the host where I run the RDSH host. So I use that quite a bit to like, I was at an event last week and I actually recomposed the pool of desktops that the instant clones deploy from the RDSH, right? I didn't want to be sawing the limb off that I was standing on kind of a thing. So I did that through RDSH. So, I don't want to really mess with that from an identity firewall because if you mess up a firewall rule during a demo, then there's no way to get back in. So that happens maybe once or twice. All right, so here's one of the new features in Horizon 7. This actually came in 7.1. It was improved a little bit in 7.3, but it's a help desk UI, which doesn't sound like a fancy feature, but customers I've seen who've used this have loved it. Right, so the screens before that we were showing, we were managing desktops, right? We knew what pool we wanted. We had, everything was tied to a pool or application, right? When a user calls in with a problem, they may not know the desktop they're on, or they may not even understand the application they're using. All they know is they click that blue button, right? So this UI allows you to kind of troubleshoot things from the other direction, right? You type in a user's name, you can see the sessions, whether they're RDSH sessions or view desktops that they're connected to. You can click on those desktops and then you can do things. Can't really see it in the screen here, but you can look at the processes that are running in the desktop that they're connected to. And there's some buttons down there where you can restart their desktop, log them off, take action to kind of fix whatever problem they're seeing right from this UI. And then in 7.3, one of the new features was role-based access control for this. So you can give different people in the help desk different permissions, right? So some folks may only need to see who's using what desktops. And then you have like a different group that you would actually want to be able to restart desktops or log people off. So there's a little bit of control that you can do as far as that help desk UI. But this very, very popular feature, I saw it as like, oh, that's just another bullet point. But people who've seen this really kind of like this way of going at troubleshooting. All right, well, so I'm about halfway through. Any questions or anything before we get kind of in the weeds? A little of this maybe kind of going off the deep end? Yeah.
When I tried to set this up in my lab, I got Horizons working great, but could not get instant clones to work because I didn't have Windows Enterprise. Is that still a requirement for Horizon? Or do you just have an enterprise install that you're able to use?
So I would have to check. I know that in 7.4, the list of things where the agent work changed a little bit. There's a little bit more support. So I don't know if it changed what tier it's on. In my lab, the instant clone desktops are actually 2016 servers. So you can I had a problem, this goes back a few years, when I was trying to use Windows 7 desktops. You only get like that 30-day trial key, but on Windows 2016 Server, you get like a 180-day trial. So I just use that instead. It's in the documentation. There's a checkbox that you have to check in the connection server to be able to use a server for a desktop, right? Normally, it doesn't allow you to do that. It assumes that you want to use it as an RDSH host. But with this checkbox enabled, and then when you install the agent, there's a place where you can say, I want to install this in desktop mode. And it'll just, every one of those 3 desktops we have is a 2016 server. When we log into the demo, you might see that the demo or the eval key expires in about 30 days. So I'll have to figure something out here before too much longer. Great question. Yeah, that's licensing is always kind of a tricky thing. So we can look into that, or I can send you some docs on the 2016 using that instead. Any other thoughts, questions? Like I said, a little of this gets in the weeds. If you want to walk into it a little bit more, kind of one-on-one after the session, let me know. I'll have a link here on, I think it's the next slide, to a blog post on a little bit of this, the multi-factor authentication piece. But remote access was one of those key things that I needed. Be able to get this lab when I'm not at home or at a customer site or something like that. So pretty easy to set up. You deploy this virtual machine. It's called a Universal Access Gateway. You can give it a whole handful of interfaces if you need to. But in my scenario, I just have the one IP. That's all it's got. And in my home router, I just say anything from the outside that's trying for 443 or 8443, just send it to the IP address of the UAG. Inside the UAG, we've got a couple things that we have to set up. First one is Horizon settings, right? So I point this at my Horizon connection server. It's pretty straightforward. It asks me for like the name or IP of the connection server. Let's see here in the screenshot. It asked me if I want to enable PC over IP or BLAST. Those are the 2 different protocols that are very common. PC over IP is probably the older of the 2. BLAST is one of the newer ones. I use BLAST because as of 7.2, there's a feature called BLAST Extreme Adaptive Transport, BEAT. And so what had a customer who was trying to set up Horizon in their lab, or in production actually, and they had some test users that were in India. And I did not realize how far India was away from a bandwidth and latency standpoint, right? It's distance you can measure, but that latency, 250, 300 milliseconds is atrocious. And so in older versions of Vue, before this BEAT was set up, there were a lot of policy settings you would have to change on, frames per second and, like refresh rate and, build to lossless and all these checkboxes and things that you had to tune to make that experience tolerable for the users that were 250 milliseconds away. And so we were testing some of that. I actually found an appliance called WAN-M. It's a WAN emulator. So you deploy it, use it as like a router in your lab. And then it's got a web page where you can go in and say, I want this latency, I want this jitter, I want this packet loss. And so you can kind of tweak that stuff. And so, I built the lab and we were tweaking all these policies, trying to make it tolerable. And then I don't know, we were about 2 weeks into it, and then 7.1 came out with BEAT, and it just changed the game, right? Because we didn't have to do all of that tuning, because it's an adaptive transport. If you're in India, you get kind of a lower quality, lower refresh. You probably can't do video, kind of a thing. And then if you're in the office, you get decent quality, which is great, because before, when you were tuning those policies were tied to desktops. And if you were using that desktop, you got the low quality video, even if you were in the building, right? Because that's what the policy said. So BEAT's definitely a thing to check out. Requires that you're using BLAST. So that's the only thing I allow is BLAST through the tunnel. So it's a good protocol to choose. It also goes through port 8443, whereas PC over IP requires one more port. I just didn't want to open one more port. And then we go in and there is a security authentication settings radius where you can actually put a radius server IP. So radius is like the old school, I can't remember, remote or authorization, something, accounting. I don't know. There's a bunch of words in there, but it's what's, when I was going through trying to set this up, a lot of the things that you find on radius were written 10, 20 years ago. Protocol really hasn't changed much, but everybody still uses it. So, if you guys, pretty much all the multi-factor authentications thing, with the exception of RSA, uses some sort of radius or exposes some sort of radius functionality. The UAG also supports reverse proxy settings. So you could go in and say, if somebody's trying to access this folder for that outside IP, go to this Windows machine, right? So instead of only using it for view, you can redirect them to other things. And we can show some of that off. I used to have a scheduled task that would run vcheck. If anybody runs a VMware environment, you should look for vcheck. It's a PowerShell thing that'll create a report of your environment. I just passed that through, so it ran on a Windows box, published to IIS. Do what? Yeah.
So I learned about that last meeting, and if you don't run it in your environment, VPN right now and do it, because it gave me so much more insight into every one of my customers' environment, and actually found 4 or 5 problems across about 7 different networks just in vCenter by itself.
Yeah. Yeah, vcheck's a great thing.
No, I got a blog post I need to write up.
So pretty easy to set up, right? Did you get it from GitHub?
Yeah, I got it from GitHub.
Okay.
I had never used PowerCLI until that point.
Oh, so many things. You see the light, right? Yeah, so I guess a good point on PowerCLI, and if you're on View 7.1 or greater and you're using PowerCLI 6.5, there's actually commandlets to connect right in. So anybody who's managed a Horizon environment, if you wanted to use PowerCLI to do that management prior to those releases that we just mentioned, you actually had to log into the connection server or any one of your connection servers, and there was a PowerShell snap-in that was installed as part of the connection server. And that was the only place you could run those commandlets, which is pretty lame if you're trying to automate things. It's almost never where you would want to run a task. So in this release, there's actually support for being able to connect to a connection server remote, like from any machine, like you would expect, and not just using PowerShell remoting or something like that. There's actually an API that's exposed that gets consumed by PowerCLI. PowerCLI, when you install it, only has 2 commandlets for Horizon. There's a connect HV server and a disconnect HV server. That it exposes an API where you can go through extension data to get everything that's in there, which is the hard way to go. There's another PowerCLI repo where there is a set of helper functions for Horizon. You can get those, and there's probably, I'd say 40, 50 functions in there at a minimum. There's probably more. You can do things like create pools, add entitlements, have a user access a desktop, that sort of thing. You can do all of that through PowerCLI. I could talk for days about PowerCLI. It's kind of my niche, my favorite thing to talk about. But we'll get back to this, and then if there's a little bit of time, we can do some PowerCLI questions. One of the other things that I passed through with the remote or the universal access gateway. Anybody ever heard of a service called Let's Encrypt? It's a free SSL endpoint thing. You can run it, it's got this automated process, runs on almost anything. Not very many examples for how to run it on a Horizon connection server, unfortunately, right? Because it's not a super common use case. But there are a bunch for IIS. So I actually used the UAG to pass that well-known directory that Let's Encrypt looks for HTTP validation. I just passed it to an IIS box and then ran the script on IIS just like you would. Once I had my certificate, I just went in and exported it, imported it into the UAG. Now I've got a SSL cert there. So pretty easy. I do owe somebody else a blog post on that as well. because it's kind of the slick workaround, right? It's the easy way, I think, of getting SSL for your connection server.
And those are only good for 90 days though.
Yeah.
They do have an automation tool. You can automate it. I know
Yeah.
it works on Linux because I use it.
Yeah, so I've got a thing, it's an automated thing on IIS. It'll regenerate the cert as needed.
But then you have to manually move it over.
Yeah. There's probably a way to automate it, but I'm sure there's a way. I just, every 90 days I can export and import a certificate. It would probably take me a good solid day to get that all figured out on my own, but.
Then it's a blog post to everyone else.
I know. I guess that is a to-do. That would be kind of a fun little project. And I'm sure it's possible because there's an API for the UAG. And so, you know, a whole bunch of PowerShell scripts to do that export of the certificate. And I'm sure we could get it in there.
What does the UAG, what does it, is that where you're running it from? Or, I mean, is that what the certificate's for?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Does it run a Linux or is it?
It does, but it's
But
kind of
it's-
like an appliance type Linux, and it's kind of a weird contraption.
Okay.
I also wouldn't want to run a task on it because the way I deploy this, I've got the configuration scripted. So when there is a new version of a UAG, I just run the script and point at the new OVA, and it just deletes the existing one, deploys me a new one, and puts the configuration back. So if I set up a task to do that, you know, renewal on there, I would have to go set it up again, you know, every time there's a new update. So I think having it on a Windows box externally probably makes more sense. And then like a scheduled task just to check to make sure they're the same. And if they're not the same, do a replace. But yeah, the UAG is just kind of a, somebody would probably kill me if they said that. It's just kind of a glorified proxy server, right? It's the thing that would sit in your extranet and proxy those connections from the internet to, yeah.
On the Let's Encrypt thing, usually, from what I've understood and used it for, one of the things you can do is from your Windows box, you just need to find a location in your appliance where it keeps its certificate store, and just either remotely connect into it and then push the file, usually in PFX format, which
Yeah.
is what you're going to be storing on a Windows machine, and then just break out different pieces and basically store it in the same location that it would normally do through the UI.
Exactly. Yeah. So just talking about an example for how to automate the moving of that certificate.
One interesting thing about those, usually most of those Linux distributions, they read their information on the certificates at, when they restart. So one thing to kind of keep in mind if you're trying to automate that is you usually have some restart operation in there to kind of reboot that either Nginx or Apache server that you run.
Yeah.
Just something to keep in mind if you want to try it.
Yeah. So I know when I put the certificate in the UAG, when I recently went through all of this, it didn't require a restart, but I went through the API. So the API could have done some voodoo in the background. So I think I would go through that web posting kind of method. But yeah, it's definitely a fun project. Need to find some time to make that happen. All right, so mentioned Radius. Did I put what that stood for? No, I don't know. Should have wrote that down somewhere, but I think it maybe is remote access, something or other. Accounting, did somebody get it? Did somebody find the Wikipedia article or something? Hook me up with that.
Search.
So yeah, what I used was just a Ubuntu Linux 1604, long-term support build with the PBIS open framework to be able to do Active Directory join. So this Linux box is joined Active Directory. 80 users can log in. I think the next page I actually have a screenshot of that.
Do you want it? It's sorry.
Remote authentication.
Yeah, remote authentication dial-in user service.
Dial-in. Yeah, there you go.
How old it is?
It's pretty old school stuff, huh?
Nice.
Did anybody hear that AOL recently shut down their instant messenger service? Did anybody know it was still available? I did not know that. So.
No, but I still see people with their email addresses.
Yeah. Anyway, so I've got it set up with the Google Authenticator PAM module. So anybody familiar with Google Authenticator, the random number generator thing? So I've got a screenshot of a little bit of this. I think it'll actually come out pretty clear. So we've about 4 screenshots here. So upper left, I've got Active Directory users' computers, right? I created a user called VMUG demo. Then on the right, I logged into my Linux box, just putty, and then type in my AD username and password that I created over there on the left. And then I've got an alias for a command, just Google-auth. And when you type that, you get this QR code that you can take a picture of with the Google Authenticator app. And you've got your new little random number generator in there. When I created the user, I added it to two groups. One group is an identity firewall group, and one group entitles it to virtual desktops, right? So could have done one group, but the way I've got things laid out, I use one group in View, and I've got this different group in the NSX identity firewall. And we'll go through a little bit of a demo on some of that stuff. So when I'm here, right, and I'm going to be logging into the lab, I'm going to be prompted for authentication 2 times. The first time will be for my Radius, my remote authentication dial-in, whatever, something service. And so I've got my username, vmug.demo. And then for my passcode, I actually type my Active Directory password and my code that gets created in Google Authenticator, right? So I have to have both of them correct to get past the first authentication. That's a thing that you could configure, but I didn't want somebody who only had the token to be able to get logged into that outside edge, right? You actually need both pieces. You just concatenate them together in that field, and then we know for sure it's you. And then in that top box where we're doing our multi-factor authentication, it says, and you might be able to make this out, it says enter your multi-factor auth username and passcode. That text that says multi-factor auth, you can actually configure that inside the UAG, and you could call it whatever, you've branded the service internally. You could say enter your Radius username and password, right? It's pretty flexible. You can just change it if you need to. And I got where you configure that at. Then after we pass this first gate, we get the second one where it asks us for our password. This is our Active Directory password only. We don't need the number for the second one. And there's you can't really see the username there, but vmug.demo is already entered into the username box for me, and I can't change it. And that's a setting that you can turn on or off if you need to have, if you have one username and code for your multi-factor auth and a different one for Active Directory. I've got a customer that's going through a domain migration, so they have new accounts in a new directory. Those are the ones that have their Radius authentication. And then they actually log into their desktops using a different account. So that they just uncheck that box and let them use both usernames separately. I really don't like that from a security practice, because anybody who has multi-factor credentials can get past that first gate, and then anybody can log in through the second gate, right? Like, I would want to make sure that they were always the same. And that is the default option, but you can uncheck that and turn that off if you need to for some sort of reason like that. All right. So that was pretty much it on the whole multi-factor authentication and remote access piece. Really only got like a couple more slides. The next two kind of cover the identity firewall piece, and then we can do a demo if anybody actually wants to see it. Any questions up to now, or random things? No? All right, identity firewall. This is one of my kind of favorite features. I'm a big fan of NSX. I sat through the Install, Configure, Manage course and just kind of got hooked on it. So what I did in the lab, so I've just got one flat network, right? Like most home labs, I've just got my router that you get at the Best Buy or whatnot. And then it has one Class C address block. In the example, it's 192.168.127.0. And so everything gets just mixed together. And this is common. You'll see this in customers' data centers all the time, right? They have a network and they just deploy the things to it. And then that network gets full, you get a new network, you deploy more things to it. Problem with that is, now that security is kind of top of mind for most folks, you don't want to have all of that stuff commingled, because if If one box gets infected, it can jump to the next box, and pretty soon, everything's encrypted with some sort of malware. So you want to have like a firewall between some of those devices occasionally. The specific thing I was trying to address, there's a guy on my team who I wanted to give access to my VROPS instance, right? So he's kind of all into that cloud management stuff, and he knows how to make VROPS dashboards and stuff, and I don't really know how to do that. And he was kind of showing me how, and he's like, man, it'd be great if I could get in your lab when you weren't there and make dashboards, and then we could just talk through them together. When I have time, I'll work on it, and then we'll talk about it when you have time. And so I'm like, well, that'd be great, but I don't really want to give you access to my whole home network, right? Really, I want to give you access to VROPS. So in comes the identity firewall, right? I create this group, put him in it, and then I set it up to, you can't really read this text down here, but there's a handful of prerequisites that you need for desktops to be able to talk to their connection server. So the way I've got my lab built, I've got 2 physical ESX hosts. They're HP DL360s. They have 96 gig RAM each. Got them on eBay for about $400. Pretty good deal, best I could find. So if anybody wants to build a home lab, I'd send you that way. But on those 2 physical hosts, I have these nested ESX hosts for VDI. And everything's managed by 2 separate vCenters, right? I've got my one vCenter that manages my VDI hosts and one that manages my production ones. And I only have NSX today on the nested VDI hosts. So what I wanted to do was say, if you're on one of those nested VDI hosts, all the desktops should be able to connect to my connection server. So the first rule that I created, like right here under these default rules, says that if you're on that cluster, right, you can reach the connection server IP on a couple of ports, right, the ones that I needed for Horizon. I didn't have to say, all of the IPs or anything like that. I just said, if you're in this cluster, you can connect to those services, which is pretty handy, right, because now I don't have to enter all the IPs or whatever. I can use that group that already exists that has my hosts in it. And then I said the destination, it was an IP set, and then there were certain ports. And then the very next thing, I gave him access to my cloud management stuff, so Login Site and VROPS. After a little bit of testing, turns out if he's coming in from the outside, he actually needs access to my default gateway for that trip to make it back to him. So that IP set also includes my default gateway so that he can route back to the internet. And we can look at that in the demo. And then the very last thing says, if you're in that group, deny everything, right? So the first rule that gets processed says, if you're in that cluster, you can connect to connection servers. The next rule that says, if you're in this group, you can connect to VROPS and Login Site. And the last rule says, if you're in that group, you can't get to anything else, right? So it processes stuff just kind of like a traditional firewall would. And then the very last line says everything gets passed, right? Because my network's pretty open. The only people I want to block are folks that are in that Active Directory group. And then we got a little bit of a demo here with some access denied action going on. Right, so I log in as VMUG demo or this buddy I work with who has an account like this, and I do an IP scan. Right, that's anybody use an Angry IP scanner? Is there something better than that? Is that no? So when I do the scan, I ping my whole subnet. I only find 5 devices. Right, we've got the 3 that are cloud management. Right, so I've got VROPS, Login Site, and then Login Site is clustered. So there's a cluster IP address for Login Site. Those are the 3 things that he can get to. And then he can ping the desktop that he's actually logged into already, just because he's on it. And then he can ping that default gateway. So those are the 5 things that he can ping. If I log in with my user account, do an IP scan, there's probably, I don't know, 30, 40 things that would respond. But if you're in that group, you can only get to a subset of things. So using group membership to control access at a firewall level, which is pretty nifty. And I think I mentioned this when we were on the RDSH slide. As of NSX 6.4, that is supported on terminal servers as well. So Microsoft RDSH, Citrix, and then Horizon for sure. All right, so that's boom, all the slides I had. Any questions or thoughts, things to talk through? Do you guys want to see a demo, or do you want to take my word for it on the screenshots? I'm happy either way. Sometimes, seeing it is believing it. Yeah.
Do you have a static IP at home, or do you use like no IP to like update your DNS records and such?
So I have a dynamic IP, but it hasn't changed in about 3 months. So semi-static.
Good for you.
I do have one of those no IP services set up, but in my actual DNS, I put the IP address. When I'm on my work laptop, which uses like this always on VPN, they block all of those no IP type services. So it doesn't work. So that's why I went into DNS and set it manually. But I also have that thing that dynamically updates. If I ever had to, I could just go in and change my IP. But yeah, it's kind of a hybrid. Any other thoughts? Anybody want to see a demo? I'm happy either way. I'm not sure what time it's gotten to be, but
We got plenty of time.
you want to see a demo? Yeah? All right. Let's do it. All right. Got to get our phone out because we're going to need our multi-factor authentication here in just a second. Let's see if we can move this out of the way. All right. Let's just change our desktops to mirror here so that I can see the same thing. All righty. Close some of that, close some of that.
Justin, to answer your question from my perspective, what I do is I have my own domain, and then I have a DNS entry for a site that I use, but that points to one of the afraid.org sites, and that's how I update my DNS, is through that. And my router actually has an option to update it, so I don't have to have a client or an agent on any of the machines. So.
How it used to be sense. Google Domains gives you, when you buy a domain from Google Domains, you get their dynamic update service for free. So
I did not know that. That's where my.
$12 a year and have a dynamic DNS not to pay for it. I'm okay with this.
I'll have to look at it. That's who my domain's through. So.
I've got a handful of these Google Authenticator codes, and when you type the wrong one, it just doesn't work anymore. But there we go. All right, so I logged in, had my AD password plus my MFA token, and when I get the right one, it gets me past that first gate, and so now I can just type in my password. And you'll see, it's kind of still hard to see, but it says HTTPS, and it's green. If you're not using a legit cert, that's red. So that's one way you can tell that my cert is actually good. So we'll log in here as me. So I'm in a handful of groups. I have access to a 2016 desktop. That's my instant clone pool. Right, I'm not using Windows 7 or Windows 10 to your point, just because licensing was a little bit more complicated there. So it's just a Windows desktop. Then I have a handful of other applications, right? For all demos, you need Microsoft Paint because it doesn't get better than that. But command prompt, that sort of thing, kind of low tech. But for demo purposes, that's a lot of what you need. But the cool thing is RDSA or remote desktop client, is running from a host inside my network, even though I'm outside my network. So I can do short names. I don't have to do a bunch of NATs or anything like that. Got a PowerShell window here. We'll go ahead and connect to our Horizon desktop. See if there's any sort of way to hide that, or there we go. That's good enough. All right, so let's do something like IP scan, and we'll do one through all the things. Right, and so see, we see a bunch of blue, right? Because those are things that are actually up, and I can get to them because I'm logged in as me. what else would we want to demo from here that we talked about? Would we want to look at the UAG configuration screen maybe where we set up some of that radius stuff, or well, what interests you guys? UAG UI, alrighty. So we'll just, yeah, here we go. 38 alive hosts. We'll minimize that. We'll say HTTPS UAG port up 9443. We'll log in here using all of our default usernames and passwords. So like I said, when we deploy one of these for the first time, we can either choose to import a JSON file that has all of our configuration in it. You can also feed that JSON file in during deployment if you use like a PowerShell script to do the deploy. So it just comes up and works like you would hope that it would. Or you can go in and configure things manually. So like I said, first thing would be the edge services. And I've got my Horizon settings in here. So this is my internal connection server name, outside name, the fact that I want to turn tunneling on. Yeah, that's about it on this screen. Here's the match Windows username checkbox. This is what's used for that MFA to make sure that the radius username and the AD username have to be set the same. By default, it's yes. I can just turn it off pretty quick. Anybody do like banking stuff? You do work for a bank or some sort of financial institution that has to follow PCI requirements? Oh man, lucky you, lucky you. So PCI recently had a thing where you had to, I think it's already passed, where you had to turn off TLS 1.0 for sure, and likely 1.1, and only leave TLS 1.2 as the enabled protocol. So right in here, there's just little check boxes to make that happen on the UAG. So it's, you know, some of the VMware products are a little, you know, you have to do some like binary math and type like a hex number into a thing to make that happen. Anybody has Update Manager? But anyway, right here, little toggle button, like it should be. You can define your syslog URL here pretty easily if you need to do something like that. Set your fave icon, all that good stuff. And then we'll go in here where we set up where are our security settings. No, it's not in here. Is it system? It's just in here the other day. Does anybody see something that looks like radius? No? Would be network. That doesn't make sense. Oh, here, authentication settings. I got to show it. So, you know, it supports other things. You can do RSA secure ID if that's what you got. In this example, we have radius. And so radius, I just put my radius IP in the box. Pretty low tech. We can, let's log into PuTTY here real quick. As a user that we don't log in with much, SVCSRADIUSO1. All right, got to add our key. So anybody watch The Office, the US version? Fans of that? So one of the things I always run into in labs is I never have any test accounts, right? There's my user account and then maybe like one or two other user accounts. But when you're testing things like identity firewall, you need a handful of accounts. So I went to the Wikipedia page for the Office US version. They had a list of all the character names. So I wrote a script to just create user accounts for all of the characters. So we could probably log in as like jim.halpert. Hopefully his password hasn't expired. Now look at that, so we're in.
There is a website you can do that with Star Wars names as well. You can pull the names in from the site.
Yeah.
With scripting.
I'm not as, maybe I don't want to say this in this crowd, but I'm not a big fan of Star Wars. So I wouldn't know any of the character names. So yeah.
Wow.
There's a lot on there that I have no idea.
Yeah, and everybody's done. And we're done for the day. All
Who
right,
asked you to
so-
come? Oh, wait. Sorry, it was me.
So we do, we run the
Put that
command.
into the interview question.
So we just run a Google-auth command. There's an alias for that kind of puts all the stuff in that we need to make this happen. So now we have a QR code for Mr. Jim Halpert to be able to log into the lab if he ever needs to. This like config stuff just gets written to a file in here called .Google Authenticator right in the user's profile. So only they have access to see their code. And then if you were to happen to delete this, instead of regenerating a QR code, you could just copy this into the Google Auth thing by hand. I accidentally factory reset my phone last week and learned how to get those codes back. So.
You accidentally factory reset.
Yeah. So my phone like locked up. I was traveling. I was in Toronto, and my phone was all messed up. And like I was trying to reboot it, and I somehow like it's an Android, right? So like if you hold down all the buttons, it'll reboot into this boot menu. Well, you don't actually need to hold down all of the buttons. Turns out the button at the home button, that's the one that presses enter. So like I had the right buttons in, and then it was like scrolling through choices, but I was actually holding down the home button too. So while you're traveling and you've got all of your, everything that you need is on your phone, and then you factory reset it, and then you can't get in your home lab for a little bit. So that's a real thing. Yeah, gotta go home to get it. But yeah, that was the least of my worries, right? So anyway. Things like that happen. So we got Jim all set up here now for MFA. You look through UAG. Do we want to log in as a demo user and show that he can't do an IP scan of anything but those 5 devices? Or sure. Yeah, you don't see that? All right, so we'll log out here. We'll just disconnect. We got all of our apps here. That's really nothing special. We'll wait until this closes here. It looks like it's still running. There we go. All righty. So vmug.demo, we type our password. We look up our code here, being careful not to brick our phone. Oh, see, I didn't get it right. There we go. All right. So we got past that first multi-factor thing. Now we just type in our AD password to log into the lab. This user can only see his desktop, right? Because that's based on the entitlements and that sort of thing.
So in the background, is that spinning up another virtual phone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if it needs one, and it probably did.
What do you run your storage backend on?
Oh, great question. Great question. So I wanted to use vSAN, right? I bought these 2 hosts, and the plan was vSAN in a 2-node configuration, right? Because you can do that. You have to have an external witness appliance. And then you can, as of 6.5, there's a direct connect option, right? So before, if you wanted to do vSAN, the recommendation was to do 10 gig interfaces, and you would need to have like a 10 gig switch, and you would plug both hosts into the 10 gig switch. And then all of the vSAN traffic went across these vSAN interfaces. In 6.5, they actually split out vSAN like replication traffic, like the internode traffic from the management traffic. So you could leave the management traffic on like a routed 1 gig network and then do like a 10 gig crossover cable for vSAN. And I knew that the hardware I was buying, that the storage controller was not on the HCL. But it was very poor performance, very poor. I had a vSAN set up before on some previous gear, and it was fine. But I was using stuff that was on the HCL. So I would say, if you're going to do vSAN, you probably should check the HCL and stick to it.
Or use Pivot3.
Or use Pivot3, right? You know, something NVMe, all flash. Do something fast, right?
You guys have a low-cost home lab model for us here?
Yeah. Groupon. I heard there's a Groupon. Yeah, so I went with a Synology DS like 1918 or something. It's the one you could get last year that had 8 bays in it. And it's got 4 1 gig interfaces in it. And I do everything NFS, and it seems plenty good. I used the drives that I had purchased for vSAN, right? So I had one SSD for each host and a couple of capacity disks for each host. And on the Synology, they have this like write cache deal that you can do if you, and it's read cache only if you have RAID 0, but if you have 2 identical devices, you could do RAID 1 and it's write cache for incoming things. And there's a VAAI plugin for NFS on the Synology. So like when I clone a VM from a template, it actually clones it on the array. So there's not a bunch of traffic back and forth from my host to the array. I can take a 2016 template that's powered off and I can have it up and running, sysprepped, and joined to the domain in about 6 minutes, which is pretty good for home lab. You know, the template's, you know, it's a full clone. It's not like I'm doing some sort of fancy dedupe or anything like that.
Admittedly, that's about as fast as our SAN environment.
Yeah. Yeah, it probably has more I/O. There's probably more going on, right? So, you know, this is a mostly idle network. I'm the only one really poking at it. So, yeah, it seems to work pretty well. But yeah, I'm assuming you have a home lab. What kind of storage are you rocking?
All of mine are local right now
Okay.
because I haven't decided if I'm going to do. I'm trying really to swing get like Eagle Logic or something, but I just haven't decided.
Yeah.
I have more wrapped up in. I actually have 2 different colos and 2 different data centers, and I have site-to-site VPN on them. And I'm trying to work on getting all the stuff together for vSAN and code this up in DC, up in one of my site sites instead of local.
Yeah, that would. Yeah.
Of course, Comcast I just switched to Comcast, which I should never have done. But I have 6 meg upload now, so I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, so I live kind of a little bit off the paved road, but fortunately our electric company is also an ISP, and they got into some sort of grant money to do like fiber everywhere. They actually run fiber modems all the way up to all the houses, whether you get broadband from them or not, and their electric meter is plugged into it. So I could go look and see how much this home lab's costing me right now.
Spinning.
Yeah, so let's not do that. Let's not do that. So I have, so this is logged in as the VMUG demo user. And I don't know if you could see some of these devices that are down when it gets to, it kind of got too far. So I'm actually rejecting traffic. So when it gets to something that is listening, you know, like would have been listening if it weren't for the firewall, it rejects it right away. Whereas all the other devices that we're scanning, it has to wait for a timeout. So you can see right now there's 5 hosts active. When it gets to a host that would have been active, but the firewall's rejecting it, Angry IP Scanner knows right away that it's not responding and it's not going to. Whereas all the other ones were kind of slower because it was just waiting for a echo timeout. And I think there's a button in here to say like delete from list dead hosts. So now we got our 5 hosts left, and it's the VROPS, the login site, and the login site load balancer, then the desktop from the pool that we're using, and then my default gateway. So yeah, identity firewall. That's pretty cool, I think. So it's really that's all I had.
VMUG Advantage.
Oh, hey, so let's talk about VMUG Advantage, right? So people who want to do a home lab, right? Licenses are kind of hard to come by, right? there's a lot of things going on in here. I've got ESX, I got NSX, got Horizon. So just from the VMware stack, you know, could be doing vSAN. There's a lot of VMware components that you need licenses for. When you go download those products, you get a 60-day trial key, which is good. It's not near as generous as Microsoft's 180-day key. And I do use 180 days of most of those Windows boxes in the lab. But one of the great options, if you need licenses for a home lab, is VMUG Advantage, because the eval experience that comes in that package gives you 365 days worth of access to all sorts of products. You had the list up earlier. NSX is in there, Horizon's in there. It's Horizon Advanced, not Enterprise. So Enterprise gives you access to that help desk UI. I don't know why that's a licensed feature, but it is, as well as instant clones. But link clones are still an option. They're a little bit slower and they require like a SQL database to use for the Composer server. But you can set most of this up. The RDSH pieces you could set up, NSX is in there. A lot of goodness, but that's really the way to get VMware licensing for a home lab.
Or become a vExpert.
There's other options, but yeah, the vExpert's kind of a moving target on what you have to do to get in that crew. It's a lot of community involvement, right? So you know, if you guys want to be one, you should talk to these folks about presenting next VMUG or something like that. I'm sure that would help. Be sure you're on Twitter. Yeah.
Twitter's a big thing on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Twitter,
All of that social stuff, really. You know, the vExpert award is basically based on community participation, right? So it's a community award for going above and beyond your job to you know, share the VMware message with other users, right? So anything that you can do in that vein will help with vExpert. Some of it is probably going to be quite a bit of time commitment, and $180 for a VMUG Advantage would probably be the easier way to go on getting some of those licenses.
Yeah, the vExpert gives you a little expanded licensing than what the eval experience does, but for most of us, the eval experience would be plenty.
Yeah. Plus the discounts on like training and certification. If you want to take an exam,
yeah.
I think you get 20% off on
20%
exams.
off, yep.
And then training, the VMware training is pretty expensive. If you want to take one of those classes, it's needed for something like a VCP, and you get maybe 15% off on training classes. And then the VMworld discount. If you go to VMworld, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Because it's only $80 more, and you get all of those licenses for a year. So it's definitely a good thing.
And if you can do like I do and get your boss to pay for it, it's even better.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, right. Especially if they're going to be paying for training, it would more than pay for itself if they sent you to one training class.
Well, and like my staff, they both have, we bought it for them as well, and they run labs on their laptops whenever they need to lap something up. Just crank something up. They don't have heavy duty laptops, but it works for a quick spin up of something.
The vExpert application's open up in May or June again.
Yeah, something like that.
Cool. Well, that's all I had. Really appreciate you guys' time. Could we get a round of applause for these leaders here that are putting all this together? Really appreciate it. And for the sponsors as well, because we couldn't have this venue or a great dinner without them. So really appreciate it. All right. Well, I'll be around if anybody has any questions. So appreciate your time.
All right. I don't have a closing slide like I normally do, but yeah. Oh, giveaways. Yeah, the important part. Yeah, I usually put that up on there, but we'll do that remote. All right. Just a couple reminders. Remember our next meeting. It's always, with the exception of November and December, it's the third Wednesday of every month. So it's pretty easy to know when our meetings are. So the quarter meetings like this one, June, September, and December are going to be more like this one, where it's a sponsored event, a little more formal. I mean, not totally formal, but more formal than our other off-month meetings, where those are more meant for open discussion. Bring the topics that you want to discuss that night, or if you want to bring something up ahead of time, it's a good time or a good lead in. If you have it ahead of time, we can put you at the beginning and let you start off the night with discussing your topic. So, the first one we had when Bishop, is it from Wigan? Yeah, presented. That wasn't, it was more of a thing like tonight, but that's not a problem. That got the discussion started, and we're definitely open to doing that. That's